What's up, guitar players? Today I'm going to show you how to find the most optimal fingering of any passage of music. Now, if you've played guitar for any appreciable amount of time, you know that having a good fingering, a good left-hand fingering, can make or break a particular passage that you're trying to work on, right? It's really, really important. It can take something that's totally impossible and make it totally fluid. And what's super cool is that this will work for, anybody who's a guitar player learning anything. Either you're an arranger, you're trying to learn arrangements, you're a composer, you're trying to learn your own compositions, or you're just, most of you just like learning pieces. This is valuable stuff that's going to help, every person who is using their fingers to play guitar, which I think is almost everybody. So just to be clear, again, optimal fingering is very important. If you're not using optimal fingering, you're going to suffer for it, and the people listening to you are going to suffer for it because it's going to be harder to play whatever it is you're trying to play. In fact, fingering is so important. I've got a whole 53-minute lecture on just that in my guitar arranging course where I go hyper in depth on it. So I've got a lot to say about it, but I want to kind of give you the main points, okay? The main kind of secrets in this video. Some of you might not even be in the habit of going through a piece of music and thinking about what the optimal fingering actually is and solidifying that early on. And this is like a big issue. You definitely want to figure out the perfect fingering before you start committing things to muscle memory, okay? It doesn't make sense to learn something if you're going to eventually change the fingering. In fact, sometimes people will work on a particular section with suboptimal fingering so much, they'll work on it for such a long period of time that even if they're presented with a better option, it won't feel like a better option because the old way is so much easier. Not easier because it is technically an easier fingering, but because they've spent 5 hours ingraining it into their muscle memory and switching it to something that would actually be better, feels like a step backwards. That's why it's important in the beginning to experiment with all of the options. Since you suck at all of the options, you can actually more properly judge which fingerings are better than others. So let me go ahead and spoil the big secret that I use, that I figured out within the last couple of years for that helps me figure out good fingerings, and it's this. So it's gonna sound like I'm memeing a little bit here, but sometimes you want to figure out fingerings backwards. Okay, that might not make sense, but let me explain. So not all of the time, usually about half of the time, it's in your best interest to sort out fingerings in reverse order. So starting with a spot in the piece, let's say a particular chord that's further along, and figuring out what would be the best fingering to go reverse. So let me back up here and tell you that I had this realization a little while ago, like within the last couple years. I realized that if you have, let's say you have a piece and you figured out a really nice fingering for it, and everything is fluid, it all works well. If you apply that same fingering and you start at the end of the piece, and it really helps to have the fingering actually written into the score in order to do this. You pretty much can't do it otherwise. But you'll see that if you apply that same exact fingering and you work in reverse, so you start at the end of the piece with the last measure and you work your way toward the first one, it will be just as fluid as if you were going forwards. All of the same reasons why this fingering works going forwards are going to be the same for when you're going backwards. Literally, I recommend, if you have a piece of music that has fingerings written into it and they're really good fingerings, try this out for yourself. Just start from the end and put your left hand on the fretboard. You don't have to actually play and stuff, but just put your left hand on and then look, okay, now I have to go to 1 here. Okay, well, that frees up 4 to go here. And then you'll see that as you go backwards through the piece, everything works out totally fine. It's pretty interesting. So, in other words, fingering doesn't care about the direction of time flowing, okay? It just doesn't. So, theoretically, you could figure out the optimal fingering of a particular piece of music starting from the back and working your way forward to the beginning of the piece, and it's all going to work going the opposite direction. It's all going to work going forward. Isn't that cool? Heck yeah, that's cool. Now you might be thinking, why in the hell would you ever do that? Why would it ever be optimal to work backwards? It sounds like a fun little thing you realize, bro, but that's not going to help me in my fingering, okay? But guess what? Yes, it will. Now I'm going to explain why, but just real quick for a second. I've been teaching arranging for the past couple years, and if it's something you want to dive into super deep, you want to learn all the fingering stuff, and you want to learn every other aspect of guitar arranging, there's a link down below. You can click it if you're at all interested. It's there if you want to click that on your own time, okay? So it may come as a huge shock to you, but you know, the vast majority of people, the vast majority of the time, are figuring out their fingering going forwards through the piece. It's what people do. The piece of music goes, you know, forward through time. So why wouldn't you do it that way? Now the problem is that's only optimal half of the time, okay? It's actually optimal the other half of the time to do the fingering backwards. So I'm not saying that like you want to take a piece of music and this particular piece of music, oh, you should figure that whole piece of music, you know, going forwards. The fingering should be figured out going forwards through the piece. And then, oh, this piece of music, this should be figured out going backwards. It's not like that. It's that in any given piece of music, depending on what's going on, it is in your interest to work either forwards or backwards, depending on the spots in the music that are the most constrained when it comes to fingering possibilities, okay? What the hell does that mean? So you need to get familiar with the idea of constrained versus unconstrained positions, okay? And a constrained position is one where there's a very limited amount of choices for fingers you could potentially use in order to play that section. And an unconstrained position is one where there's lots and lots of options for fingers that you could potentially use, okay? And I'll show you, I'll give you an example of this real quick. So if I were to, for example, play this chord, right? This is a gnarly chord, right? If I were to play this chord, I'm using all four of my fingers here. And the only way to actually do this is to use fingers 2, 3, 1, and 4. That's the only way you're ever gonna be able to do that. I mean, maybe I could do like a weird like crossbar thing. I could potentially switch these fingers around, but as you can see, like this is a relatively constrained position in the sense that there's really not that many options, and there's especially not many comfortable options. Whereas if I were to take this, let's say just this, these two notes, for example. Now, how many combinations can I play these particular two notes in, right? This two note chord. Well, I could do 3 and 4. I could do 2 and 4. I could do 1 and 4. I could do 1. I could do 2. I could do 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, also 3, 4, also 4, also 1. You get the idea. There's so many different ways that I could potentially play that. A lot of times I'm arriving at very strange, unorthodox positions out of sheer necessity, not because I want to do weird crap and I want my left hand to struggle. No, I don't want that. So why does this matter? Well, it matters because when you're trying to figure out fingering, let's say you're working on a particular measure, you want to start with the most constrained chord or most constrained passage. So if, you know, if for example you have to go here, from here to here, right? The piece goes, for example, the best way to figure out that the correct fingering is to start with the constrained position, which is this, because it requires a very particular, you know, way of using your fingers and everything. And then from this position, which is very constrained, which tells you, hey, you got to do your hand like this. From here, it's going to be a lot easier to tell which options are viable when moving to this unconstrained position, right? Because from here, I can do this in 4 different ways, right? But what wouldn't make sense in this case is to work backwards from here, right? It wouldn't make sense to figure out this one first and then here, right? I'll give you some more examples that'll hopefully make a little bit more sense. In a particular piece of music, when the piece of music actually moves from an unconstrained position into a more constrained position, it makes more sense. It's faster and it's going to be easier to start with the constrained position first, figure out what the best fingering for that is, because there's going to be less options. Okay, it's going to funnel you into a certain way of doing it, and then work backwards and then figure out, hey, what are the best fingerings if I were to play this piece backwards to go from this constrained position into the unconstrained one. So for example, let's say a piece of music plays these 2 notes right here, and then it goes to these 2 notes, right? Or these 4 notes right here, right? Right now, this particular position is more constrained, right? This is like I have to use all of my fingers. It does this kind of stair step thing. I don't think there's actually any other way to play this. Now, there might be different ways to play these particular notes in different spots on the fretboard. I'm not thinking about that. I don't care about that right now. I'm just talking about fingering, okay? So in this particular example, let's say the music, again, it goes here. This is less constrained, right? There's lots more options for the way that I can play this, right? I can play it in a bunch of different ways. So what we want to do is start with the constrained position, and I ask myself, what's the easiest way to get to here? Right, I'm going backwards now. I'm asking myself from this position, what's easiest? Well, I would keep my middle finger on here and probably just slide my 4th finger down here. Right? Now, this is a slightly unorthodox position. Like, just if I just gave you these 2, you know, it's going to be kind of rare that you would use 2 and 4 for that, right? But in this particular example, it makes that transition so smooth, right? And across the board, this is the way that I'm figuring out, especially very difficult transitions, and especially spots in pieces of music, compositions, and arrangements where, man, this is like, I don't exactly know how to handle this. Now, I will say this, that one of the most important things to do if you're going to go this route is it really helps to use a piece of software like Guitar Pro, for example, where you can actually put the fingering information into the software and write it. If you can write all the fingering in for that, and then you can write the finger for that, then it will be really easy to just look at the score, see the fingering that's in the score, and then play it. You don't have to like reverse it and figure out, hey, what would it be in the opposite direction, all that stuff. And you can do this for long sections as well. Like a lot of times I'll have long sections where I'll start with the constrained position, and then I'll work my way backwards and ask, okay, from here I can go to here, and it just works out so much easier. Okay, I promise. So think of it like this. You can think of constrained positions are like locked gates in a maze, okay? And they require a very specific key, a very particular key. And that key is the finger position. It's actually like, okay, in order to play this particular chord, this locked gate, this complicated constrained chord, I need to use this particular key. There's really no flexibility in how to get past these gates, right? You have to use this key. On the other hand, less constrained stuff, less constrained chords and notes and phrases are more like open paths where you have multiple ways you could go. You could take the left fork, you could take the middle way, you could take the right way, or whatever, right? When you're navigating a maze, starting with the locked gate, starting with the constrained chord position, and then asking yourself, okay, what is the best path to get here is actually going to be the most efficient way. You start at the gate and you go backwards through the maze, and you see that, oh, the mountain path is the one that took me here. So hey, again, if you're interested in this arranging stuff and you want to learn more about the fingering thing and everything else involved in specifically guitar arranging, there's a link down below with additional info. And what I would say is next time you're working through a piece of music and you get to that fingering phase, remember this, try it out, and let me know what you think of it. And if you try it and if it works for you, it definitely works for me, and it definitely works for the people that I've taught it to. And if you like this video, you know what to do. Bye.